The survivors moved carefully through the empty streets, their footsteps echoing softly against cracked asphalt and broken glass. The city had once been loud and alive, full of engines, voices, and flashing lights. Now it was silent except for the wind and the distant groans of the undead. Anna walked in front of the group, her eyes scanning every dark corner. She held a worn pistol in her hand, the metal scratched from weeks of fighting. Behind her walked Mark with his rifle, Jenna with her bow, and the others carrying whatever weapons they could find. They moved past abandoned cars, some burned, others smashed into buildings from the chaos of the early days. Skeletons still sat in some of the driver's seats, frozen in the moment the world ended. "Keep quiet," Anna whispered. Even Tim, the youngest survivor, understood the rule. Noise meant attention, and attention meant death. In the distance they could see the shape of the factory. Its tall smokestacks rose above the ruined city like black fingers reaching into the gray sky. The building was enormous, surrounded by rusted fences and old loading docks. Mark squinted toward it. "That place looks like a fortress," he said. Anna nodded slowly. "That's exactly why we need it." But the closer they walked, the more uneasy the air felt. The wind carried faint sounds, the slow dragging steps of the dead. They were not alone. A zombie stumbled from behind a wrecked truck, its skin gray and torn. Jenna reacted instantly. Her arrow flew silently and struck the creature in the skull. The body collapsed without a sound. But Anna did not relax. Because if one was here, more were never far behind. The survivors reached the outer fence of the factory just as the sun began to sink behind the ruined skyline. Long shadows stretched across the ground like dark fingers. The main gate hung crooked on its hinges. Someone had tried to close it once, but time and decay had won. Mark pushed the gate slowly, wincing as the metal creaked. Everyone froze. No sound followed. "Clear," he whispered. They slipped inside the yard. The factory grounds were massive. Rusted containers sat scattered across cracked concrete. Old delivery trucks were parked in crooked lines, their tires melted and broken. The building itself towered above them. Broken windows covered the walls, and faded company logos were barely visible beneath layers of rust and dirt. Anna pointed toward a loading entrance. "Inside." Quickly, they rushed to the door and forced it open. A heavy smell poured out, rust, oil, and something else. Decay. The inside of the factory was darker than expected. Large machines filled the space like metal giants sleeping in the shadows. Conveyor belts stretched across the room. Chains hung from the ceiling. Mark swept his flashlight across the floor. Dust. Footprints. But not fresh ones. "Looks empty," he muttered. Anna didn't trust it. "Spread out," she ordered. "Check every corner." Because in this world, empty places rarely stayed empty for long. The survivors worked quickly. They dragged heavy crates across the main doors, stacking them into barricades. Old metal barrels were rolled into narrow hallways to block entry points. Jenna tied small alarm lines using empty cans and wire. If something moved through the building, they would hear it. Tim watched nervously from the raised platform above the factory floor. "Do you think they'll find us?" he asked. Anna climbed the ladder beside him. "They always do," she said honestly. "But tonight we're ready." Mark joined them, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This place could hold for a while," he said. "Only 3 main entrances." Anna looked across the dark factory. Rows of machinery created natural choke points. High walkways gave them a view of the entire floor. If they played it right, they could survive the night. But survival in the apocalypse was never about comfort. It was about buying time. And time was running out. Because outside, the first distant groans were already beginning to echo. The horde had caught their scent. Darkness spread across the factory as the last light of day disappeared behind the broken windows. The survivors sat quietly, conserving energy. Nobody spoke much. Every person listened. Outside, the sound of the undead slowly grew louder. Dragging feet, low growls, the scraping of fingernails on metal. Tim hugged his knees. "How many do you think there are?" he asked softly. Mark answered bluntly, "Too many." Anna walked along the upper walkway, studying the yard outside. Shapes were moving now, dozens of them. More appeared every minute, drawn by instinct. The dead never stopped walking. They never grew tired. They only gathered. And once enough of them arrived, nothing could stop them. Anna tightened her grip on her pistol. "Positions," she whispered. The siege of Haven had begun. The first zombie hit the factory door with a dull metallic thud. Then another, and another. The survivors froze in silence, every muscle tense. Outside, the sounds multiplied quickly. Scratching, pounding, dragging feet. The dead had gathered at the entrance, drawn by scent and instinct. Mark slowly raised his rifle. "They found us," he whispered. Anna didn't answer. She was watching the door carefully. The heavy metal barrier trembled as something slammed against it again. Dust fell from the frame. Another hit. This one stronger. The barricade of crates shifted slightly. Jenna knocked an arrow. "How long will that hold?" she asked. Anna spoke quietly. "Not long." The pounding grew louder. Suddenly a gray hand forced its way through the cracked door seam. Rotten fingers clawed at the air. Mark fired. The gunshot exploded through the factory like thunder. The zombie dropped instantly. But the noise had already done its damage. Outside, the entire horde reacted. Groans rose in the darkness like a storm awakening. Hundreds of feet began moving. And the pounding intensified. The siege had truly begun. The door burst open halfway as the barricade shifted again. A zombie forced its way inside. Then another. Mark fired twice more, dropping both of them. Jenna's arrows followed quickly, silent and deadly. But more bodies were already pushing forward behind them. Anna jumped from the platform and grabbed a steel pipe from the floor. "Hold the line," she shouted. The survivors formed a defensive position between 2 massive machines. The narrow gap forced the zombies into a single path. The first creature lunged forward. Anna crushed its skull with the pipe. Another grabbed her jacket, snarling with rotting teeth. Mark shot it at point-blank range. The smell of blood and decay filled the air. Tim watched from the platform above, his small hands gripping the railing. He had never seen so many of them. And they just kept coming. One survivor slipped on oil and nearly fell into the grasping arms of the dead. Jenna fired an arrow that struck the attacker in the eye. "Careful," she shouted. But the fight was already turning chaotic. Because the door finally gave way. And the horde started pouring inside. Anna looked around the factory floor desperately. There were too many. Even with the narrow path, the zombies kept pushing forward. They needed something bigger, something destructive. Her eyes landed on an old fuel barrel beside a welding station. An idea formed instantly. "Mark," she shouted, "shoot the barrel." Mark didn't hesitate. He fired once. The bullet struck the metal drum. A second later, boom, a fireball erupted across the floor. Flames roared outward, knocking several zombies backwards and igniting others instantly. Burning corpses stumbled blindly through the factory, spreading chaos among the horde. For a moment the survivors gained breathing space. Jenna used the time to grab more arrows. Anna helped a wounded survivor climb onto the platform. But the victory was short. Because outside, more shapes were already approaching. The explosion had acted like a beacon. The dead from across the district were now moving toward the factory. And the night was still very young. By midnight the factory yard was filled with movement. Through broken windows the survivors could see dozens, then hundreds, of silhouettes stumbling toward the building. The dead were gathering faster now. The earlier explosion had called them. Inside, everyone was exhausted. Mark reloaded slowly. "Ammo's getting low," he said. Jenna's quiver was half empty. Tim sat quietly, pale with fear. Anna stared through the window at the growing horde. She knew the truth. The factory wasn't a refuge anymore. It had become a battlefield. And if the barricades failed, none of them would leave alive. She turned back to the group. "We hold until morning," she said. "Then we move." Outside, the horde pressed closer to the building. Hands reached through broken glass. Bodies slammed against the doors again. The siege of Haven had only just begun. And the worst was still coming. The factory trembled again. This time it wasn't the doors. A loud cracking sound echoed from the far side of the building. Anna turned immediately. What was that? Before anyone could answer, a section of the old brick wall suddenly collapsed inward with a thunderous crash. Dust exploded into the air as chunks of concrete and rusted steel scattered across the floor. And through the hole, the dead began crawling inside. Dozens of them. The gray hands clawed over the rubble as they forced their way through the opening. "New breach," Mark shouted. The survivors ran toward the wall, weapons raised. Jenna fired arrows as fast as she could, dropping the first few zombies as they climbed over the debris. Mark fired carefully, conserving ammo, each shot striking a skull. But the hole was wide. Too wide. More bodies kept appearing. Anna grabbed a heavy metal hook hanging from a chain and swung it hard into the head of a zombie climbing through the rubble. The impact crushed its skull, but another immediately replaced it. "Back up," she ordered. They retreated toward the central machinery again. The factory that once felt like a fortress was now turning into a trap. Outside, the horde was pressing harder than ever. And the broken wall had opened the floodgate. The battle moved deeper into the factory. The survivors fought between enormous industrial machines that once produced thousands of parts every day. Now those machines became obstacles and cover in a desperate war for survival. A zombie lunged across a conveyor belt toward Mark. He fired once. The bullet tore through its skull. Another grabbed his arm from behind. Anna smashed its head with a wrench before it could bite. "Watch your back," she shouted. The floor had become slick with oil and blood. Several survivors slipped as they moved, making every step dangerous. Jenna climbed onto a raised platform and began shooting arrows downward into the crowd of undead below. From that position she could see something terrifying. "They're everywhere," she yelled. Through the shattered windows and broken walls, hundreds of shapes were moving across the factory yard. The horde had fully surrounded the building. Inside, the fight became brutal. One survivor screamed as a zombie grabbed his leg. Mark pulled him free and shot the creature, but the bite had already happened. Everyone knew what that meant. But there was no time to think about it, because the dead was still coming. Another crash echoed from the front of the factory. The main gate outside had finally collapsed. Anna ran to the window and looked out. The sight made her heart sink. The entire yard was now filled with zombies pressing toward the building. The broken gate had allowed even more to enter. The factory was surrounded. "Positions!" she shouted again. Mark climbed onto the upper walkway to gain a better angle with his rifle. From there he fired carefully into the crowd outside. Each shot dropped one zombie. But for every one that fell, 3 more stepped forward. Jenna continued shooting arrows until her quiver was nearly empty. Tim helped reload magazines, his hands shaking but determined. The survivors were exhausted. Every muscle burned. But none of them stopped fighting. Because stopping meant death. Sparks suddenly exploded from one of the electrical panels. The lights flickered violently. Then everything went dark. The factory was swallowed by shadow. Only the faint orange glow from burning debris outside illuminated the interior. "Flashlights!" Mark called. Small beams of light cut through the darkness. But the zombies kept moving. Now they came from every direction, silent except for their low growls. The darkness made everything worse. A zombie appeared suddenly from behind a machine, grabbing one survivor by the shoulders. Anna reacted instantly, driving her knife into its skull. Another stumbled out of the shadows toward Tim. Mark fired just in time, dropping it inches away from the boy. Smoke from earlier fires filled the building, making it hard to breathe. The factory had become a nightmare maze of darkness, fire, and death. But slowly, very slowly, the number of zombies inside began to decrease. Because the survivors were still standing. Still fighting. Still refusing to die. The final hour before sunrise felt endless. The survivors barely spoke. They waited, listened, watched the shadows. Occasionally one lone zombie would stumble through the broken wall, only to be quickly killed. But the massive horde outside had begun to wander away. Perhaps the fires and noise had faded enough to lose their attention. Perhaps the survivors had simply endured long enough. Either way, the siege was ending. Anna finally sat down for the first time all night. Her arms trembled from exhaustion. Mark leaned his rifle against the railing. "I thought we were finished," he admitted. Anna looked across the ruined factory floor. "So did I." The first sunlight slipped through the shattered windows. Golden rays illuminated the smoke-filled factory. The battle was over. Bodies of the undead covered the floor, mixed with broken machinery and debris from the collapsed wall. But the survivors were still alive. Anna walked slowly to the broken entrance and looked out at the quiet city. The streets were empty again. The horde had moved on. For now. Behind her, the others gathered their remaining supplies. They were wounded, exhausted, and shaken. But they had survived the night. Anna looked back at her group. "Today we rest," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, we keep moving. Because in the world after the fall, survival was never permanent. It was only the next day's beginning." If you made it this far, you survived the night with us. The world is gone. The cities are ruins. And every day is a fight to stay alive. But the story is far from over. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see what happens next in this dark world, make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of the apocalypse. New episodes are coming, and the journey through the world after the fall is only getting started. Until the next episode, stay safe, keep watching the shadows, and remember, in this world, survival is everything.